Hello friends and welcome. Today I am going to deliver a lecture on menstrual cycle, fertilization, implantation, pregnancy, parturition and lactation. The main objectives of today's deliberation are: number first, to discuss in detail the process of menstrual cycle. Number second, to explain the process of fertilization. Number third, giving a precise account about implantation and pregnancy. Number fourth, to give a general and thorough idea about parturition. Finally, we shall be discussing the process of lactation. Now let us start with the menstrual cycle. The menstrual cycle is the female reproductive cycle that makes eggs available for fertilization. Menstruation involves the hypothalamus, pituitary and ovary, and in humans lasts roughly around 28 days. In other words, menstrual cycle is the regular natural changes that occur in the uterus and ovaries that make pregnancy possible. The cycle is required for the production of oocytes and for the preparation of the uterus for pregnancy. About once a month, the uterus grows a new thickened lining, that is the endometrium, that can hold a fertilized egg. When there is no fertilized egg to start a pregnancy, the uterus then sheds its lining. This is the monthly menstrual bleeding, also called menstruation or menstrual period, that occurs from your early teen until menstrual periods end around age 50, that is the menopause. Now let us discuss the events of menstrual cycle in detail. The menstrual cycle can be described by the ovarian and uterine cycle. The ovarian cycle describes changes that occur in the follicles of the ovary, whereas the uterine cycle describes changes in the endometrial lining of the uterus. Both cycles can be divided into three phases. The ovarian cycle consists of the follicular phase, ovulation and the luteal phase, whereas the uterine cycle consists of the menstruation, that is menses, proliferative phase and secretory phase. Number first is the menses that lasts for approximately 5 days. Menstruation, also called menstrual bleeding, that is menses, catamenia or a period, is the first phase of the uterine cycle. Typically, the menstrual cycle begins with the onset of menses, bleeding and loss of the tissue lining of the uterus, which lasts from 5 to 7 days. During menses, the levels of the estrogen and progesterone in the blood from the previous cycle begin to drop to their lowest levels. Small episodic pulses of gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, leading to the small pulses of luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone from the pituitary. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone stimulate several follicles to develop in the ovaries. The follicles secrete estrogen. The follicle that develops first secretes greater amounts of estrogen than the others, and this hormone suppresses the development of the other follicles. The dominant follicle develops outer layers of cells called granulosa cells and a fluid-filled space called the antrum. It also continues to secrete estrogen. The proliferative phase is the second phase of the uterine cycle, when estrogen causes the lining of the uterus to grow or proliferate during this time. As they mature, the ovarian follicles secrete increasing amounts of estradiol and estrogen. The estrogens initiate the formation of a new layer of endometrium in the uterus, histologically identified as the proliferative endometrium. The estrogen also stimulates cryptis in the cervix to produce fertile cervical mucus, which may be noticed by women practicing fertility awareness. The secretory phase is the final phase of the uterine cycle, and it corresponds to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. During the secretory phase, the corpus luteum produces progesterone, which plays a vital role in making the endometrium receptive to the implantation of the blastocyst and supportive of the early pregnancy by increasing blood flow and uterine secretions and reducing the contractility of the smooth muscles in the uterus. It also has the side effect of raising the woman's basal body temperature. Number 2 is the follicular phase that approximately lasts from day 6 to day 14. First is the follicular phase part 1 that approximately lasts from day 6 to day 10. The follicular phase is the first part of the ovarian cycle. During this phase, the ovarian follicles mature and get ready to release an egg. The later part of this phase overlaps with the proliferative phase of the uterine cycle. The primary follicle continues to develop and grow larger. The antrum gets bigger and pressure develops inside the follicle. The follicle secretes estrogen at a faster rate. Estrogen levels in the blood rise. The rising estrogen levels will eventually signal the brain that the egg is ready to be released. This rising estrogen levels stimulate growth in the tissue and blood vessels that line the uterus. The uterus lining gets thicker in preparation to receive a fertilized egg. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone levels remain low but steady, supporting the development of the follicle. Next is the follicular phase part 2 that lasts from day 11 to day 14th. The primary follicle continues to develop, grow larger and is about ready to be released. The antrum grows and pressure is near its highest level inside the follicle. The follicle continues to secrete estrogen at a faster rate. Estrogen levels are at their highest, signaling that the egg is ready to be released. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone levels remain low but steady, supporting the development of the follicle. The uterine lining continues to grow in response to stimulation by the estrogen. The mucus plug in the cervix becomes thin and watery. Number 3 is the ovulation that starts from day 15. Ovulation is the second phase of the ovarian cycle in which a mature egg is released from the ovarian follicles into the oviduct. The high estrogen levels have signaled the brain that it is time to ovulate. The hypothalamus secretes massive amounts of gonadotropin releasing hormone, stimulating the anterior pituitary to secrete massive amounts of luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. This surge lasts only 24 hours. The luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone stimulate enzymes in the follicle. The enzymatic reactions along with the pressure of the egg antrum release the egg from the follicle. The egg travels into the fallopian tube where fertilization can take place. Last is the luteal phase that lasts from approximately day 16 to day 28. The luteal phase is the final phase of the ovarian cycle and it corresponds to the secretory phase of the uterine cycle. The corpus luteum degenerates, the egg gets swept along by gradual wave-like motions of the finger-like projections in the walls of the fallopian tube. Luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone levels fall back to their low steady levels. Estrogen levels fall somewhat after the luteinizing hormone surge but rebound due to continued secretion of estrogen and progesterone by the corpus luteum. The uterine lining remains thick and ready to host a fertilized egg or growing embryo. The corpus luteum shrinks and begins to die. It is programmed to die in 14 days unless it receives stimulation from human chorionic gonadotropin, a hormone secreted from a growing embryo. If fertilization occurs and the embryo implants in the lining of the uterus, the human chorionic gonadotropin rescues the corpus luteum and it continues to secrete estrogen and progesterone throughout the pregnancy. If fertilization does not occur, the corpus luteum dies at the end of the luteal phase. The unfertilized egg also dies and passes out of the uterus when menses begins. Estrogen and progesterone levels fall, menses starts, and the uterine lining is shed, and new cycle begins. Women can have a range of problems with their periods, including pain, heavy bleeding, and skipped periods. In this, we have the amenorrhea, that is, the lack of a menstrual period. Number 2 is the dysmenorrhea, that is, painful periods, includes severe cramps. Number 3 is the abnormal uterine bleeding, that is, vaginal bleeding that is different from normal menstrual periods. It includes bleeding between periods, bleeding after sex, spotting any time in the menstrual cycle, bleeding heavier or for more days than normal, or bleeding after menopause. Now, let us discuss the next part of our today's lecture, that is the fertilization. Fertilization is the fusion of haploid gametes, that is the egg and sperm, to form the diploid zygote. It is important to mention here that there can be subtle differences in the fertilization process which occur naturally within the body or through reproductive technologies outside the body. The overall product in both the cases is a diploid zygote. In fertilization research, after humans, the mouse is the most studied species, followed by domestic and farm animals. The process of fertilization involves components of and signaling between both sperm, that is the spermatozoa, and egg, that is the oocyte. It includes biochemistry and binding and activation of molecular receptors on the sperm head and egg. Now that we have looked at the overall process of fertilization, let us try to understand the human fertilization in detail. Human fertilization is the union of a human egg and sperm, usually occurring in the ampulla of the uterine tube. The result of this union is the production of a zygote cell or fertilized egg, initiating prenatal development. Scientists discovered the dynamics of human fertilization in the 19th century. The process of fertilization involves a sperm fusing with an ovum. The most common sequence begins with ejaculation during copulation, follows with ovulation, and finishes with fertilization. Fertilization occurs when the nucleus of both a sperm and an egg fuse to form a diploid cell known as zygote. While the spermatozoon is about to pierce, the yolk is drawn out into a conical elevation termed the cone of attraction or reception cone. Once the spermatozoon has entered, the peripheral portion of the yolk changes into a membrane, that is the previtelline membrane, which prevents the passage of additional spermatozoa. The sperm undergoes a series of changes as freshly ejaculated sperm is unable or poorly able to fertilize. The sperm must undergo capacitation in the female's reproductive tract over several hours, which increases its motility and destabilizes its membrane, preparing it for the acrosome reaction, that is the enzymatic penetration of the egg's tough membrane, that is the zona pellucida, which surrounds the oocyte. After binding to the corona radiata, the sperm reaches the zona pellucida, which is an extracellular matrix of glycoproteins. A special complementary molecule on the surface of the sperm head binds to a ZP3 glycoprotein in the zona pellucida. This binding triggers the acrosome to burst, releasing enzymes that help the sperm get through the zona pellucida. Once the sperm cells find their way past the zona pellucida, the cortical reaction occurs. Cortical granules inside the secondary oocyte fuse with the plasma membrane of the cell, causing enzymes inside these granules to be expelled by exocytosis to the zona pellucida. This in turn causes the glycoproteins in the zona pellucida to cross-link with each other, that is, the enzymes cause the ZP2 to hydrolyze into ZP2F, making the whole matrix hard and impermeable to the sperm. This prevents fertilization of an egg by more than one sperm. The cortical reaction and acrosome reaction are both essential to ensure that only one sperm will fertilize an egg. The oocyte now undergoes its second meiotic division, producing the haploid ovum and releasing a polar body. The sperm nucleus then fuses with the ovum, enabling fusion of their genetic material. The cell membranes of the secondary oocyte and sperm fuse. In preparation for the fusion of their genetic material, both the oocyte and the sperm undergo transformations as a reaction to the fusion of cell membranes. The oocyte completes its second meiotic division. This results in a mature ovum. The nucleus of the oocyte is called a pronucleus in this process to distinguish it from the nuclei that are the result of fertilization. The sperm's tail and mitochondria degenerate with the formation of the male pronucleus. This is why all mitochondria in humans are of maternal origin. The pronuclei migrate toward the center of the oocyte, rapidly replicating their DNA as they do so to prepare the zygote for its first mitotic division. The male and female pronuclei don't fuse, although their genetic materials do. Instead, their membranes dissolve, leaving no barriers between the male and female chromosomes. During this dissolution, a mitotic spindle forms between them. The spindle captures the chromosomes before they disperse in the egg cytoplasm. Upon subsequently undergoing mitosis, which includes pulling of chromatids towards centrioles in the anaphase, the cell gathers genetic material from the male and female together. Thus, the first mitosis of the union of sperm and oocyte is the actual fusion of their chromosomes. Each of the two daughter cells resulting from that mitosis has one replica of each chromatid that was replicated in the previous stage. Thus, they are genetically identical. Various disorders can arise from defects in the fertilization process. For example, polyspermy results from the multiple sperm fertilizing an egg. Now, coming to the next part of today's lecture, that is implantation and pregnancy. In humans, as in all other mammals except for monotremes, implantation is the very early stage of pregnancy at which the conceptus adheres to the walls of the uterus. At this stage of prenatal development, the conceptus is a blastocyst. It is by this adhesion that the fetus receives oxygen and nutrients from the mother to be able to grow. In humans, implantation of a fertilized ovum is most likely to occur about 9 days after ovulation, ranging between 6 and 12 days. After the long 6-day trip from the fallopian tubes, the blastocyst, which has since divided into two sections, arrives within the uterus and begins to burrow or implant into the wall of the uterus. At this point, the blastocyst is a grouping of cells comprised of an inner collection of cells which will ultimately develop into the embryo and an outer shell whose purpose is to provide protection and nourishment to the growing embryo. During this time, the amniotic sac is forming, as is the yolk sac and the placenta. The development of a growing baby is composed of 3 layers, that is the ectoderm, mesoderm and endoderm, which will eventually form his or her organs and tissues. It is interesting and frustrating that the earliest signs of successful implantation can mimic an oncoming period. For instance, one may have cramps that last for up to a week. Cramps can occur because the shape of the uterus begins to change after implantation is successful. Another possible sign of successful implantation is bleeding, which is a very normal thing. However, it does not occur in all women. Pregnancy, also known as gravidity or gestation, is the time during which one or more offspring develops inside a woman. A multiple pregnancy involves more than one offspring, such as with twins. Pregnancy can occur by sexual intercourse or assisted reproductive technology. It usually lasts around 40 weeks from the last menstrual period and ends in childbirth. This is just over 9 lunar months, where each month is about 29.5 days. Symptoms of early pregnancy may include a missed period, tender breasts, nausea and vomiting, hunger and frequent urination. Pregnancy may be confirmed with a pregnancy test. Pregnancy is typically divided into 3 trimesters. The first trimester is from week 1 through 12 and includes conception. Conception is followed by the fertilized egg traveling down the fallopian tube and attaching to the inside of the uterus, where it begins to form the fetus and placenta. The first trimester carries the highest risk of miscarriage. The second trimester is from week 13 through 28. Around the middle of the second trimester, movement of the fetus may be felt. At 28 weeks, more than 90% of babies can survive outside of the uterus if provided high quality medical care. The third trimester is from 29 weeks through 40 weeks. Term pregnancy is 37 weeks to 41 weeks, with early term being 37 and 38 weeks, full term 39 and 40 weeks, and late term being 41 weeks. After 41 weeks, it is known as post-term. Babies born before 37 weeks are preterm and are at a higher risk of health problems such as cerebral palsy. During pregnancy, the woman undergoes many physiological changes which are entirely normal, including cardiovascular, hematological, metabolic, renal and respiratory changes that become very important in the event of complications. The body must change its physiological and hemostatic mechanisms in pregnancy to ensure the fetus is provided for. Now coming to parturition. Parturition is the act or process of giving birth to the offspring. The terms used to describe the parturition vary with the species of animal it is being used to describe. In mammals, the process is initiated by hormones which cause the muscular walls of the uterus to contract, expelling the fetus at a developmental stage when it is ready to feed and breathe. Labor is a physiological event involving a sequential, integrated set of changes within the myometrium, decidua and the uterine cervix that occur gradually over a period of days to weeks. Biochemical connective tissue changes in the uterine cervix appear to precede uterine contractions and cervical dilation, and all of these events usually occur before rupture of the fetal membranes. Like many biological processes, the process of labor and delivery is divided into stages. The goal of the labor process is parturition, or the forcible expulsion of the fetus from the mother's uterus. There are 3 major stages of labor. Number first is the dilation stage. This begins when true labor starts. Number second is the expulsion stage, which ends in parturition or the birth of the baby. And number third is the placental stage, which, as you may be able to guess, is the expulsion of the placenta from the uterus. Now the first stage, that is the dilation. Early in labor, uterine contractions or labor pains occur at intervals of 20 to 30 minutes and last about 40 seconds. They are then accompanied by slight pain, which usually is felt in the small portion of the bag. As labor progresses, those contractions become more intense and progressively increase in frequency until at the end of the first stage, when dilation is complete, they recur about every 3 minutes and are quite severe. With each contraction, a twofold effect is produced to facilitate the dilation or opening of the cervix. Number second is the expulsion stage. About the time that the cervix becomes fully dilated, the amnion breaks and the force of the involuntary uterine contractions may be augmented by voluntary bearing down efforts of the mother. With each labor pain, she can take a deep breath and then contract her abdominal muscles. The increased intra-abdominal pressure thus produced may equal or exceed the force of the uterine contractions. These bearing down efforts may double the effectiveness of the uterine contractions. As the child descends into and passes through the birth canal, the sensation of pain is often increased. This condition is especially true in the terminal phase of the stage of expulsion, when the child's head distends and dilates the maternal tissues, as its labor depends upon the position in which it is lying and the shape of the mother's pelvis. Third is the placental stage. With the expulsion of the child, the cavity of the uterus is greatly diminished. As a consequence, the site of placental attachment becomes markedly reduced in size, with the result that the placenta is separated in many places from the membrane lining the uterus. Within a few minutes, subsequent uterine contractions complete the separation and force the placenta into the vagina, from which it is expelled by a bearing down effort. Now, let us discuss the last part of our today's lecture, that is the lactation. Lactation is the secretion of the milk from specialized glands, that is the mammary glands, to provide nourishment to the offspring. Lactation is a hallmark feature of female mammals, placental and otherwise. Lactation is under endocrine control with several hormones stimulating responses, including progesterone, estrogen, prolactin and oxytocin. Lactogenesis, or the process of changes to the mammary glands to begin producing milk, begins during the late stages of pregnancy. The delivery of the placenta and the resulting dramatic reduction in the progesterone, estrogen and HPL levels stimulates milk production. Colostrum is the first milk a breastfed baby receives. It contains higher amounts of white blood cells and antibodies than mature milk and is especially high in immunoglobulin A, which coats the lining of the baby's immature intestines, helping to prevent pathogens from invading the baby's system. In general, there are 4 stages of lactation. Number first is the mammogenesis, that is the growth of the breasts. Number second is the lactogenesis, that is the functional change of the breasts so that they can secrete milk. Number third is the galactopoiesis, that is maintaining the production of milk. And number fourth is the involution, that is the termination of milk production. The important hormones involved in lactation are prolactin, estrogens, progesterone, adrenal corticoids, insulin and growth hormone. The chief function of lactation is to provide nutrition and immune protection to the young after birth. In almost all mammals, lactation induces a period of infertility, which serves to provide the optimal birth spacing for survival of the offspring. That is all about today's lecture. Hope you have understood it very well. Thank you very much and have a good day.